Hi guys, this video is on amphibian reproduction, and by the end of it you should be able to explain the different modes of reproduction and the life cycles of amphibians, describe the different strategies in both frogs and salamanders, and explain the behaviors of parental care, feeding behavior, and defense and escape as amphibians. So generally amphibian reproduction, there's three different approaches. There's to development anyway. There's the aquatic development, where eggs are deposited in the water and they develop in the water. The juveniles develop in the water. There's semi-terrestrial, where eggs are deposited outside of the water and larvae develop in the water. And so that usually happens in areas where the eggs can be deposited, like on leaves above a pond or above a body of water, and when they hatch they fall into the water. So the eggs are a little more protected than just being in the water, so they're a little more protected from predators being out of the water, but then it still allows for the development in the water. And then some amphibians have total terrestrial development, where the eggs are deposited on land and they develop on land. This usually happens in pretty moist places, so that the eggs don't dry out and the larva can still develop. And usually what happens there is the larva will fully develop, like the tadpoles fully develop inside the eggs, and when the eggs hatch it's just a little tiny adult. So there's a range of amphibian life cycles, and these three images here show some of the basic ones. Frogs go from egg then to tadpole. Tadpole develops legs, loses a tail, and you go to adult frog. We also, I'm going to skip over here, the salamander, eggs laid in egg masses. Then there's the aquatic larva with the external gills, and then the adult terrestrial salamander. This is a newt life cycle. The red-spotted newt. We have the eggs, and then the gilled larva, terrestrial red F stage, and then the adult stage is again aquatic, and so this has kind of an extra stage in addition to these two. Paedomorphosis, we talked about that a little bit in class, is the retention of larval characteristics. So like the external gills, in most species you see those in their larval stages, but there's some species where those are retained in adults, and so we call that paedomorphosis. And in some cases paedomorphosis will happen kind of depending on environmental conditions. So in Ambistomidae, depending on how moist or how dry it is, the individuals can mature and breed in their larval stage. So like if it's really wet, they can keep their larval characteristics like external gills and breed in the water. Or if it's dry, they breed in their adult stage. So let's look specifically at salamanders. Courtship happens mainly based on pheromone signals. Salamanders don't really call to each other. In aquatic species generally have a shorter breeding season. Ambistomidae, they have, they're called explosive breeders, which means that breeding happens really pretty quickly. And what happens is males deposit spermatophores in temporary ponds before the females arrive. And these little white spots are spermatophores. So they're just little mounds of sperm. There's not a lot of courtship that happens. Females will come and they can pick up those spermatophores. And so one reason for explosive breeding is if the breeding is happening in these vernal pools or ephemeral ponds where it's just, you can see here it's leaf litter and then just a little bit of water on top. That water might not last long, so getting all the breeding done really quick is important. But for terrestrial species where that's not quite so important, There's usually a longer breeding season. Examples from Plethodontidae, they're prolonged breeders. And the male and the females both have territories, so the male territories don't overlap, but one female's territory might overlap many males' territories. So her eggs could be fertilized by multiple males. Frogs, for their courtship, they use more of the acoustic signals, and that's why we're learning all those calls of the different frogs. When frogs come together to breed, the behavior is called amplexus, where the male grabs the female in this copulatory embrace. And again, there can be explosive breeding or prolonged breeding in frogs. And usually explosive breeding is going to happen when the water is scarce or when the water is kind of filled with predators that could, prey on the frogs. And so in the family Ranidae, we see more explosive breeding. Prolonged breeding, in that case, you'll see that females have more choice. The males will have territories and they'll call to attract the females, and it can be over a longer period of time where the females can really listen to the calls, and a lot of times the way the call sounds is indicative of certain physical characteristics. Like if the call is deeper, the male is usually bigger. If it's like a more intense call, then it's a more energetic male. And so the females will listen to all those calls and kind of pick the one that they like the best. There's not really the rush that there is with explosive breeding. She can be picky. And this happens in the family Hylidae. So these pictures, this one shows, these both here show explosive breeding and how there'll just be multiple frogs out at once, all trying to breed with the females. And this is, these are both spring peepers, and here you see the call and then the amplexus. So parental care doesn't happen often in amphibians, but it does happen sometimes. We talked about some of the crazy adaptations for reproduction, the things like swallowing the eggs and letting the young develop inside the vocal sac or inside part of the stomach, carrying the eggs on the back. So parental care is actually more common in salamanders than it is in frogs. Some of the ways that it occurs is some salamanders will guard their eggs or even like carry them around with them. Sometimes it just means moistening or aerating the eggs, so to kind of keep them from drying out and keep them viable. And then in some cases it's transporting the eggs. So this frog is transporting the eggs and even transports the tadpoles until they're ready to kind of hop away on their own. So amphibian feeding behavior. Most amphibians, frogs and salamanders, feed mostly on insects and invertebrates. There's some exceptions to that, but in general, that's the case. There's two main approaches to foraging. So you can either sit and wait, which is called ambush foraging, or there's active foraging, also called wide foraging. So the sit and wait foraging, that requires less energy, right? Because you're just sitting there waiting for prey to arrive. But active foraging, depending on the abundance of prey, could be kind of more fruitful, right? You might not be able to just sit there and wait for prey to come. Sometimes you have to actually go and look for it. Prey detection, there's different ways that can occur: visual, chemical, tactile, so like by feeling, and thermal, like temperature cues. So mostly visual and chemical is what's used, and generally for the sit and wait ambush foraging, visual comes more into play, visual detection, and for the active or wide foraging, that's when the chemical detection comes more into play. Many amphibians, especially the anurans, have the projectile tongue, so that tongue that they can flick out and capture prey. Remember, in a lot of them it's attached at the front, so they can flick it out and then sling it back into the back of their mouth so that the prey is way back there and they can swallow it. Because there's limited food processing in the mouth, most prey in amphibians is swallowed whole. So that's how amphibians get their food, but what about amphibians being food for other things? There's some adaptations for defense and for escape in amphibians so that they don't get eaten. And some of those are their coloration. So there's cryptic coloration where they blend in. It's like camouflage, right? There's a gray tree frog blended in with that bark. There's also disruptive coloration, and that's when, like here in the marbled salamander, where the spots or the stripes kind of create an irregular margin, and for some predators makes it hard for them to tell the like where the edges of the animal are, so it makes it a little harder for them to be captured. There's some species that are capable of changing color, so there's polymorphism, and some of them can change pretty readily. Like here you see this color change, right? And so that can help them kind of blend in, kind of goes along with the cryptic coloration in some cases. And then of course there's the warning coloration that tells predators with the bright colors. The bright colors indicate toxins, right? So the bright colors say, don't eat me, I will kill you if you eat me. And then for those that even with the coloration don't quite ward off predators, some of them have escape adaptations. So especially in the tropics, there's a number of frogs that can do this gliding, so they can jump and glide, and their webbing between their toes helps them kind of catch some air and glide from tree to tree to escape predators. So again, let's go back and make sure that you have these things in your notes: modes of reproduction, life cycles, specific reproductive strategies for both frogs and salamanders, and then understanding parental care, feeding behavior, and defense and escape in amphibians. Alright, I'm leaving you with a joke again. What kind of shoes do frogs wear? Think hard. It's tough. Open-toed! I know you love these. Okay, have a great night. We'll see you in class.